أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا Muhammad وآله الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to the Dictations. Inshallah, in today's session we're going to talk about the i'tiqaf. And the i'tiqaf, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with it, is a sort of spiritual retreat where a person decides to leave their home and they go to the masjid, where they spend minimum 3 days in the masjid, and they have to be in a state of fasting. They should be fasting as well, and they spend 3 days in a masjid, and this is essentially an opportunity for an individual to do some self-reflection, do dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ask for forgiveness and so on. It's a spiritual retreat basically. So you have an opportunity to really cut yourself off from the dunya, the busy life of the dunya, the work life, the family life, all this commotion that exists in your life. You take an opportunity to go spend 3 days on this retreat, minimum 3 days. As we will see, the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, it seems that he would do the i'tiqaf in the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan. So his i'tiqaf would be very long. It would be 10 days long. But most of, a lot of people just do it for 3 days, and that's how it happens. But, we want to look at the i'tiqaf from two different perspectives in this talk. We're not going to go into the ahkam of i'tiqaf. That's not something we want to even discuss in these dictations. The ahkam, the laws that are around them, you can read them off. If you follow a marja, you can read your own marja's ruling. What are they? We're trying to look at these things from a different perspective. The history of these things, the social impact of these things. That's the kind of stuff we want to engage with in the dictations. And you realize, so funny enough, when I went to Iran, one of the things that I noticed in 2013, it was in Rajab. It was the month of Rajab. What I noticed is there was this big media campaign about an i'tiqaf happening. And up until then, the association of the i'tiqaf for me was with the month of Ramadan. So I was kind of confused. What is this i'tiqaf that they're speaking about in the month of Rajab? And there was this entire campaign, and students are being encouraged to sign up, and different organizations are coming, and different institutes are coming and saying, look, come to this masjid for our i'tiqaf, or come to this masjid over here, Masjid Imam al-Askari or Masjid Jamkaran, and we're gonna have this i'tiqaf, and there's a whole program organized and so on. We'll go together. So for me, it was very strange. Like, what's going on? I thought i'tiqaf was just, firstly, I never knew why is this a big thing in Iran in the month of Rajab. And secondly, what was very interesting is that there was this whole congregational aspect to it as well. So this was very interesting. Later on, inshallah, in this talk, we'll explain how did this association of i'tiqaf in the month of Rajab, how did that develop in Iran in particular. But my point is that we can look at i'tiqaf from two perspectives. One is the sort of the legal debates over it that that occurred at certain point, and then we can look at it from a social phenomenon that currently exists, particularly in Iran, because that's where it's a very big thing. I have not come across i'tiqaf being a big nationwide thing in other than Iran. Like, I don't think in Pakistan it's like that, or in Middle East and these other Islamic countries, the other Muslim countries. I don't believe i'tiqaf is done in a congregational way. And we're going to look at some of the literature that is written and published by Iranian researchers. I'll just go over them very briefly so we can kind of see, like, what are the pros and cons of this entire phenomenon. And because at the end of the day, for Shia communities in general, what happens inside Iran and the type of direction that the Iranian society goes towards, it does impact the greater Shia population in different parts of the world. So in recent years, we've noticed certain Shia mosques in the West even organizing i'tiqaf in their masajid. I've participated myself in 2 of them in different years, and that's never really was done. So where is this coming from? Where is this push and idea coming from? Well, it's a big phenomenon nowadays in Iran. So we want to look at these discussions a little bit. Now, when you look at the so first thing I want to look at is this. In Iran, when you look at the i'tikaf, you're going to notice that it's a really big thing in the month of Rajab. Whereas in the hadith corpus, you find that the i'tikaf was done by the Prophet in the month of Ramadan. Now, no jurist really has an issue of you doing it outside of the month of Ramadan. So no one has a problem. You can do it outside of the month of Ramadan. It's a mustahab act anyway. It's not wajib. Initially it's a mustahab act, like for you to actually go and engage in an i'tikaf. It's a mustahab recommended act. So you can do it anytime during the year as long as it's in the masjid. But why is it in the month of Rajab? Because even if it's a mustahab act, when you look at the sources, you would say, well, the mustahab act of it, by the Prophet was done in the month of Ramadan. So where does this Rajab come from? And over here we come across this individual, Shaykh Mirza Mahdi Burujardi. Shaykh Mirza Mahdi Burujardi was a scholar. He was a scholar, and he was a student of Shaykh Abdul Karim Hayri Yazdi, who was the founder of the Hawza of Qom in the last century. So Shaykh Mahdi Burujardi lived from 1881 to 1969, so he died right before the revolution. He was also the head of the affairs of the Hawza as a representative of Shaykh Abdul Karim al-Hayri Yazdi. And what we hear, or what we learn, is that this Shaykh Mahdi Burujardi, because he was under the time of the Shah, and he was fed up of he was fed up of the way that the country was being run, he began to take the 3 days of the month of Rajab on the 13th, 14th, and 15th, which are known in our Shi'i tradition to be very noble days, days which are very, very rewarding. If you must, it's better recommend to fast on those days, and there's other a'mal for those days as well. He took those 3 days and he decided to go to this masjid over here on the screen, called Masjid al-Askari, Masjid Imam Askari, which is, if you have been to the city of Qom, you will see this masjid right across the shrine of Lady Ma'suma Qom. So this masjid is very visible. You'll see it definitely if you've gone for ziyarah to Qom. There's a whole story behind it, how Imam Askari, gave the funds for this masjid and so on. But maybe we'll talk about that when we talk about the wukala system and the agents that the imams had. This was one of the projects that Imam al-Askari salam paid for. So he would go to this masjid. Shaykh Mahdi Burujardi began to go to this masjid alone, because i'tikaf is a very personal act of worship. It's a mustahab act and you do it on your own. It's not a congregational activity. So he would go to the Masjid al-Askari and do the i'tikaf in the month of Rajab. And they say that he began to do it, one time, or first year, second year, and then some of his students began to see, or they say even one of his teachers began to see that he was doing i'tikaf, and that led to some of his students saying that they wanted to participate as well. So the year after, a couple of his students came with him. And then the year after, a few more people came. And then slowly, it became such a big thing in the students, with the students of Qom, that Ayatollah Burujardi, the Grand Marja of Qom at that time, he had to even, shut down his classes for those couple of days, because majority of the students would be going to the i'tikaf in the month of Rajab. So they say that this entire association of the i'tikaf with the month of Rajab was due to Shaykh Mirza Mahdi Burujardi, who just started it off on his own accord. He wanted to do it on those days because they were noble days and he was fasting anyways. So he would do that, but then slowly it became this culture, and hence until today, the i'tikaf in the month of Rajab is a very big thing in Iran. Now, I'm not saying that i'tikaf in Iran doesn't happen in the month of Ramadan. No, in the month of Ramadan also, especially the last 10 nights of Ramadan, there's a big culture of i'tikaf even in Iran in the month of Ramadan. But for me, it was just surprising to see that there are 2 occasions in Iran where they do i'tikaf. One in the month of Ramadan, but then the Rajab one is also huge, and there's a lot of marketing done for it, there's a lot of preparation done for it, and so on. So that's kind of the story of the the association of the i'tiqaf with the month of Rajab in Iran in particular. Of course, if you look at us today in our communities, nobody in our Western communities associates i'tiqaf with the month of Rajab, because that practice hasn't really been spread to us yet. Maybe it's just a matter of some time that someone will decide to even bring that practice, which is just it's a practice that was started by a scholar, and for their time and context, it may have been really good and it still works for them. But is it really going to be effective for us to start it as a community thing? I'm just saying this is how things spread, and this is how things change in the communities for good or worse. I'm not saying this is a bad practice. It's a mustahab act. It's a recommended practice anytime during the year if you have an opportunity. But what is interesting is when you look at the research and you want to try and figure out when you want to study the history of i'tiqaf in the Shia communities, unfortunately you cannot find much before the Safavid era. Right, Safavid era meaning 16th, 17th centuries. You cannot find much before that. And this is because there was a specific opinion that many of the jurists, the Shia Imami jurists, they had an opinion that said that the i'tiqaf can only happen in 4 masjids. Okay, this has been the traditional, mainstream opinion, or very, a lot of ulama had this opinion that i'tiqaf can only happen in 4 masjids, and that is the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina, then you have Masjid al-Kufa, obviously in Kufa, and there's a masjid called Masjid al-Basra. Right, and what is this Masjid al-Basra and so on? We're not going to get into that, but there's a masjid apparently in Basra that you can do i'tiqaf in that as well. And this is what has come in the narrations. So the jurists would say, well, because the hadith only mentioned these 4 masajid, you can only do i'tiqaf in these 4 masjids. And hence, for many centuries, because the Shia population was not even in these cities for most of history. Many of them were in Najaf, or I'm talking about later on, after the Imams. It's in Najaf or Hilla, or in Persia, in different areas of Iran or Lebanon, wherever. These 4 masjids are not in those cities. So therefore, you don't have a culture of i'tiqaf in the Shia communities. And there's nothing, you cannot find any works or manuscripts or treatises or anything like that. Yes, i'tiqaf is discussed in the books of fiqh. Just like the fasting is discussed, or Hajj and Salat, it is understood that it's an act of worship and it has rules and laws and regulations. There are conditions. There's a lot of details that you can go and read your marja's book and see what are the different rules and regulations for it. But we're trying to look at it from a practice. Was this something the Shi'i communities practiced? And you find that you're gonna struggle to find anything before, as I said, before the Safavid era. Now, what do we see in the Safavid era? There are these 2 scholars, which I mentioned in one of the previous dictations as well. Sheikh Bahai, who has a kashkul that I was speaking about. But more importantly than him, you have another scholar by the name of Shaykh Lutfullah al-Maysi. Okay, Shaykh Lutfullah al-Maysi. And we find a treatise, a risala, that has been written by him. And Shaykh Lutfullah, just for those who don't know, he died he basically died sometime between 1623 to 1626, right? So this is 17th century, which is 1032 Hijri. Between 1032 to 1035 Hijri, he died between that. So he lived in the 16th century and some part of the 17th century. And this is pure Safavid era in Iran. And we find a treatise that is written by him. And this treatise is very, very interesting. And this treatise, we're going to look at that basically. That's what I want to look at in this Dictations. Now, Shaykh Lutfullah is originally from Lebanon. As some of you may know, when Shi'ism overtook Persia in Iran, when the Safavids came into power, they brought in a lot of intellectual power from Lebanon, particularly from the area called Jabal Amil. A lot of scholars came from there. Shaykh Bahai is one of them, this Shaykh Lutfullah is one of them, and many, many others are also from that region. And they came to Iran, and they really helped develop the intellectual scene and so on. That's something I wanted to mention. So Shaykh Lutfullah is part of that tradition, the Lebanese, the Arab scholars who came to Iran. Now, this Risala, the reason why it's interesting, and we're going to look at it, so I have it opened here. Right, so this is the treatise of Shaykh Lutfullah, and this is published in a very interesting journal called Mirasa Islamiyya Iran. So it's a book which has different manuscripts that have been researched and they have been transcribed and published and so on. So in that volume 1 of it, this Risala is published. The entire Risala is there. So we're obviously not going to read the whole Risala, but I'm going to summarize the contents of this. Right? In this Risala, in this treatise, Shaykh Lutfullah is actually writing this treatise because he is answering some people who have a problem with the practice of i'tiqaf. So just a little bit of back history. Shaykh Lutfullah, and before him, immediately before him, Shaykh Bahai. These two scholars had started the practice of i'tiqaf in Qazwin and in Isfahan. But lo and behold, those 4 masjids that we had initially mentioned, they don't exist in Qazwin and Isfahan. So these scholars were doing the i'tiqaf in a Masjid al-Jami, which is, Masjid al-Jami is a major masjid of the city, where there's a major congregation happens, or a Jummah Salat happens, and there's a regular appointed Imam of the masjid. That's what we mean by Masjid al-Jami. And Shaykh Bahai and Shaykh Lutfullah had started this practice in Qazwin and then also in Isfahan. And it is because of this practice, some people, or I guess based on this treatise, it seems it was one individual, they attack Shaykh Lutfullah and they say, what are you doing? You cannot do the i'tiqaf outside of those 4 masjids. And instead now you've started this bid'ah, essentially. You've started this innovation. This is an innovation. The hadiths are saying you can only do it in those 4 masjids, and our ulama, and the person says we have a consensus that our ulama said you cannot do i'tikaf out of those 4 places, 4 masajid. And by you doing this, you've done an innovation. And you've gotten everyone involved in this innovation. So, Shaykh Lutfullah is responding to that basically in this treatise, right? And you would be, it's interesting. So we don't know who was that critic. What were his, we know his issues because Shaykh Lutfullah is answering those questions, but it would be interesting to know who was this person because, and what was his reasoning and so on. But anyways, in this treatise, Shaykh Lutfullah begins over here and he answers the very first question, the very first concern. And he says, look, the first concern, so these are the concerns, ahaduhuma, okay, he says, look, the first concern that this person has with me is, let me just zoom in a little bit. Over here, for those who can read Arabic, they can read it, but I'm going to just translate it for you guys. He says, look, the first question this individual has against me is that why or how is the i'tiqaf being done in Masjid al-Shah, which is just a very recent mosque. Okay, what is the Masjid al-Shah? I'll show you guys what is the Masjid al-Shah. Masjid al-Shah is a mosque that was built in Isfahan. And these are pictures I took back in, I believe, 2015. Some work was being done, so I couldn't really go inside. The Masjid al-Shah, this is Masjid al-Shah. It was built between 1611 to 1629. And Shaykh Lutfullah died in 1626. So, or anywhere between 1622 to 1626. So the i'tiqaf was being done in Masjid al-Shah when it was not even fully completed. But of course, it seems like the masjid was in use and people were coming for jama'ah, but yet the construction was still going on. So this individual, so this is the Masjid al-Shah, it's a UNESCO World Heritage site. And this individual is saying to Shaykh Lutfullah that you are doing the i'tikaf in Masjid al-Shah and it's a jadid, it's just a new place. It's not even, it's just a new mosque. How did you just create a new mosque and start the i'tikaf in it? So over here he begins to answer. He begins to answer. And his first answer is that, look, who says that? So basically he tries to say that there is no consensus that the i'tikaf can only happen in those 4 masjids. And in fact, he says that the i'tikaf can also happen in a mosque which is called Masjidul Jami'. Right? That is his argument. He says the i'tikaf can happen in a Masjidul Jami' as well. So if you can argue that, if he can prove that to this individual, then therefore you are no longer limited to the 4 mosques. And then he quotes a lot of different names of scholars on page 327. He starts to name the ulama who had opinions that you can do the i'tikaf in al-Masjidul Jami'. And over here, I want you to pay attention because it's very interesting. So he starts quoting all of these names. Okay, he starts from. So I think he starts from here. He says, look, Shaykh al-Murtada. I believe he starts from Shaykh Mufid, if I recall. So anyways, he's going through all these names. I was thinking he mentions Shaykh Mufid. I believe he does, but I just can't locate it right now. But this is all the names. Then he keeps going on. He says Shaykh Mufid and Ibn Abi Aqil and Muhakkik Hilli and Shahid Awwal and what's his name? The sons of Shahid Thani. And then he goes on. He says Sayyid Hussain al-Mujtahid al-Amili, Al-Amir Muhammad Bakr al-Shahid al-Thani and his 2 sons, Shaykh Bahai, Shaykh Hussain al-Harithi al-Samadi al-Amili. Shaykh Lutfullah says, my own great-grandfather, he believed in this. He was a jurist as well. His 2 sons believed in it. And I believe in it. Anyways, he's mentioning all of these names. But what's interesting for me is that when you pay attention, you realize majority of the names that Shaykh Lutfullah has mentioned are of ulama from Lebanon, Arab scholars. And these Arab scholars, they lived in Lebanon. So they also don't live in those regions where the 4 mosques are, but yet their opinion is different. So it seems that the jurists who were from Jabal Amil, or jurists of Lebanon, they had arrived at a different conclusion. Maybe they had access to certain narrations, or maybe their ijtihad or their understanding of certain narrations was different. Because remember, these set of jurists of Jabal Amil, they were very much in a Sunni environment. They were in touch with a lot of Ahl Sunnah scholars as well. And perhaps they saw a culture over there. Right now, I'm just speculating. I'm just saying, why did these set of ulama, who majority of them are all from Jabal Amil, Arab scholars, why did they arrive at a different conclusion, but nobody in Iran, no jurist, no Iranian Persian jurist arrived at the same conclusion? And it seems that they were influenced by a general culture that perhaps existed in Jabal Amil or in Lebanon in general. And remember, a lot of these scholars from Lebanon, they had a lot of Ahl Sunnah teachers as well. And you always notice that the Lebanese scholars, or the scholars of that region, they were, in my reading of these scholars, they were very, very proactive. They were far more daring in arriving at conclusions that were not the mainstream. And this is a trend you always see in the history of Lebanese scholars. And Jabal Amil scholars were known for that as well. So if you look at this over here, Shaykh Lutfullah, when he starts mentioning these names, he's barely mentioning any Persian scholar, a jurist in this. He's mentioning all the Arabs. Whereas the person who's critiquing him, it seems that he was a Persian and he had certain reservations. Maybe he's seeing these Arab jurists as, you're coming into our country and our practices and our culture that you don't understand how to do ijtihad. Maybe he's thinking about these Arab jurists in that way. But Shaykh Lutfullah is responding and saying, look, your claim that there is a consensus on this matter is not true. I've just shown you names of dozens of ulama who believe that you could do a i'tiqaf in a Masjidul Jami'. That's why he's mentioning all of these. Then there was this other discussion that he does in the Risala, where the person says, because there was, some of the akhbaris in particular, but not always the akhbaris, but many times the akhbaris, they would say that when a narration says that so for example, in our scenario, the narration may say that a Masjidul Jami', you can do i'tiqaf in a Masjidul Jami' in which an Imam leads the prayer. Many akhbaris would say that when it says Imam should lead a prayer, or Imam which is adil, they will say this is talking about the infallible Imam. not just any imam who happens to be adil. This was a hermeneutical discussion. This was a discussion on interpretation of what does that word mean. And this discussion appears in many other places. For example, in Jummah Salat as well. In Friday prayers, it says an imam adil should lead the Jummah Salat. Well, jurists ended up with all sorts of conclusions. Some said you cannot even pray on Jummah in the Ghaiba, in the era of occultation, because we don't have an imam adil. But obviously, different opinions existed. This is the same situation that appeared over here, that some of the narrations were saying that a Masjid al-Jami, you can do i'tiqaf in it if there is an Imam Adil that leads the prayers in there. Whether it's regular or whether they have prayed even one time, there are some discussions on that. But it seems that Shaykh Lutfullah is responding to that and saying, look, Imam Adil is just anyone who is a person who is just, who is not an open sinner, who is not a fasik. So he begins to answer and he says, this Masjid al-Shah, which is now being built in Isfahan, is a masjid where it's a Masjid al-Jami, and it is a place where there is an Imam Adil leading the prayer. So you can do basically a i'tiqaf in it. Anyways, so that's the first question he answers. Then he goes to a second discussion. He says, look, this person is asking me, why is the i'tiqaf being done only in the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan, right? And that may sound like a very weird criticism on Shaykh Lutfullah. Like, what do you mean? I thought it is in the last 10 days of Ramadan. But it seems the reason why he's asking this is because there are some narrations that say that the Prophet did i'tiqaf in the first 10 days of the month of Ramadan. Some say he did it in the second 10 days of the month of Ramadan. And some say, it's over here, this is the discussion. And some say that he did it in the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan. So this critic is saying, why are you limiting it to just the last 10 days? When the Prophet did it in different years, the Prophet did it in the different 10 days. In one year he did it in the first 10 days. In the second year he did it in the second 10 days. So Shaykh Lutfullah, begins to answer. And he says, look, we have narrations on all three. And it's fine. It's fine. And Shaykh Lutfullah begins to now explain why the Prophet did it in the middle of why do you see these differences? He says that, look, the Prophet performed the i'tiqaf during the second 10 days because the year before that, he missed the i'tiqaf during the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan because of the Battle of Badr. Because of the Battle of Badr, he missed the 10 days of the month of the i'tiqaf, so he did the qadha of it in the next year. So he did the middle 10 days, and in fact, he even then did the last 10 days again. So 20 days of i'tiqaf. So you might say, what do you mean qadha? It's not, i'tiqaf is not even an obligation, it's not even wajib. So why would the Prophet do qadha? So Shaykh Lutfullah says, look, maybe because the Prophet had done another or a vow of some sort, and hence why it had become obligatory on him. So he kind of did a qadha for it. That's how he tries to explain it. And then he quotes also another tradition which shows that the Prophet did i'tiqaf in the first 10 days. Doesn't comment on it, but it seems he just mentioned it to show that, look, at the end of the day, it's permissible to do it in the first 10 days as well. But he's unable to give an explanation for it. But he says, look, the recommendation is definitely the last 10 days. The istihbab of it is definitely in the last 10 days. So that's the second critique he's trying to address. Then he says, in a third, so he said, okay, what's the third critique? The third critique is also very, very interesting. And you would be like, what's going on? What are these guys talking about? The third critique on him is so when you go do the i'tiqaf, why have you put a qubba or a khayma? Meaning, why did you put a tent, like a roof covering basically of a sort, or a qubba is like an alcove, roof covering. Why is this alcove roof covering installed for the i'tiqaf within the mosque? Okay, so that's the issue that is being brought up. Now, once again, some of you might be like, what's the issue with that? What's wrong with installing a tent in a masjid for i'tiqaf? And the reason for that, I'm trying to find the ishkal, the critique over here. I should have just numbered written down the page numbers, because I've done a whole summary of this in English already. So right here, right? He says he's talking about over here the darb al-qubba wal khayma. You know why? So I'm going to explain what the critique is. That's important. I was just showing you. This is the discussion right here. For those who can read the Arabic, what is the critique? The critique is not mentioned in the Risala itself. So you kind of have to work backwards and reverse engineer. All you get is the answer of Shaykh Lutfullah. But the critique is that it's possible this critic is likening the installing of the shade or the tent and comparing that to construction of a minaret inside a mosque. Now even that might be confusing. But look, there was an opinion that the classical jurists held that once a mosque had been built and was ready for use, you were not allowed to construct anything inside of it, like a minaret or anything. You could not construct anything. And there were some other discussions as well. Can the minaret be higher than the masjid and all those discussions? And it seems that's where the critic is coming from. You know, when you install this qubba or this khayma, it's a new installation in the masjid. The masjid is already built and it's being used, and now you're building this new thing, or maybe you're building something that is higher than the walls of the masjid. So there were these opinions that some of the jurists held, and I think that's how that's why he's critiquing Shaykh Lutfullah. So Shaykh Lutfullah is arguing against him. He's saying, look, this is not a problem, because if there is a general benefit in constructing something even inside the masjid, like setting up a shade or a tent for the i'tiqaf, for the people to come and be a little bit comfortable so they can at least sleep properly and protect themselves from the sun, so it does not, as long as this does not cause any obstacle for the worshippers in performing the salat, you know, in the time of jama'ah, when people come do the salat, as long as it's not a barrier for that, what's the issue? So that's what he begins to, that's how he responds to that. And then there's a fourth critique that he responds to, and that is also very, very interesting. All of these discussions show you the mindset and the what were the type of questions people had at that time. These are very important and eye-opening. So one of the last critiques he answers, he says, basically he says that the critic says, why are you doing ihya during the i'tiqaf? Ihya over here means, why are you encouraging people to stay awake throughout the night in ibadah? Once again, it's not clear. Like, what's the problem? Like, what's your problem if we are staying up during the night? And to be very honest, I couldn't figure out either. Like, what's the issue? What was the exact issue that this individual, this critic, had with doing ihya? But Shaykh Lutfullah, at the very least, he tries to answer this. So here it's on page 321. He begins to answer. 321. I'll just open it up so, as I said, those who are familiar with Arabic can read it. He begins to answer and he says, look, I'm going to quote a narration where I can show from that even ihya is not a problem. Doing ihya is not a problem either. And that is, there's a narration where Imam Sadiq ﷺ says, the Imam Sadiq is saying that you can do i'tikaf in the Masjid al-Jami and so on. And then he says that when it would be the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan, the Prophet would do the i'tikaf in the mosque. A shade would be set up for him. He would tighten his waistcloth, the mi'zar, and fold his bed. And someone asked Imam Sadiq, did he distance himself away from women? And Imam Sadiq says, no, he wouldn't distance himself away from women. Okay, distancing in this narration, distancing himself from women, Shaykh Lutfullah is interpreting that as saying, it's not the case that he could not even talk to his wife, or he could not even touch her or anything. No, What is prohibited in during the i'tikaf is relationships with your spouse, but not that you can't even talk to her or can't even see her. So that's what this is addressing. But the point that Shaykh Lutfullah wants to mention here is that it says that, look, the phrase that says that the Prophet would fold his bed is a metaphor for him doing ihya during the night. So when it says the Prophet would fold his bed, that's essentially an indication. It's a metaphor that, look, you are allowed to do ihya in the night during the i'tikaf. So khulasa, Shaykh Lutfullah addresses all of these criticisms against him, but it shows you this world in Isfahan and Qazwin, that there was this argument that was happening, and there were some scholars who were not happy with it. They were not happy with what is happening in this new phenomenon that is coming into the society, where Shaykh Lutfullah and Shaykh Bahai had popularized i'tikaf, because before that it was not known to be a practice, because of the opinion that you can only do it in 4 masjids. But Shaykh Lutfullah says no, Masjid al-Jami is also okay, and this Masjid al-Shah is also an instance of Masjid al-Jami, and we're going to basically do it. And it became a popular practice at that time. And his final critique, so Shaykh Lutfullah then responds back to this person, and he says to this person that I have heard from many sources that this individual who is critiquing me does not accept solitary reports, khabar al-wahid. And that if this is truly the case, that this person does not even accept khabar wahid, we know when Shaykh Lutfullah says this, it seems that the person was not an akhbari, right? Because the akhbaris, they accepted all the narrations. So Shaykh Lutfullah is saying that, look, if you don't even accept khabar wahid, then you should not restrict the i'tikaf to the 4 masjids, because the narrations on the 4 masajid are all khabar wahid, and you cannot attain anything from that. So instead, you should just go back to your general principles, which would then allow you to say you can do i'tikaf in all of the masajid, right? And that's because the Quranic ayah, there's a Quranic verse about it as well that talks about i'tikaf. He says, look, just take the atlaq of that ayah. I know I'm getting a little bit technical over here, but inshallah, even these ideas about solitary reports, what is a solitary report? That's also part of the dictations. Inshallah, it will come sometime in the near future. The entire story of khabar wahid. What is this khabar wahid that keeps popping up? Essentially, it's a report that doesn't give you confidence and certainty. So Shaykh Lutfullah is saying that, look, you don't even accept acting on khabar wahid, and the narrations we have about the 4 masjids are very handful. So how did you get yaqeen that the i'tikaf is restricted and limited to just these 4 masajid? So that's kind of what he's arguing over here. Anyways, I wanted to show you all this treatise, which is a very cool treatise, and it kind of takes you back to this debate that was occurring in Safavid Iran amongst the Shia ulama, whether there should be an i'tikaf and whether there should not be an i'tikaf. But what we can say with to quite an extent, that i'tikaf was not a culture in the Shia communities up until Shaykh Bahai and Shaykh Lutfullah. These ulama, they came to Iran, they were brought to Iran, and they started this practice, and then perhaps after that it remained a practice. That is one perspective that you can look at the i'tikaf from, right? These overall sort of history. But then you have this phenomenon that is occurring in Iran right now, particularly after the revolution, where the i'tikaf is, it's like this congregational activity, right? It's like honestly, when you're there, it's like almost like Muharram or something, because everyone's talking about it and everyone's engaging in it, and there are these posters about it and where to sign up for it if you wanna reserve your spot in this masjid and so on. So it's like this big event that is happening. This is very, very recent. This entire organized i'tikaf started about 6 years after the 8-year war between Iran and Iraq. So Iran and Iraq had an 8-year war. 6 years after the war ended, that was the first time that the country organized, there was an organized effort to institutionalize i'tikaf. That's the word that you want to use. They institutionalized it. And what we see in the statistics is that every year there is an increase in the participants. Some of the stats were saying that there's a 36% increase every year that occurs in the i'tikaf, to extent that nowadays, if you miss a spot, you will hit the quota of the masjid and you cannot get access to the i'tikaf because there's no more space left in the masajid. There's at least, some of the statistics say that at least 780,000 people participate in the i'tikaf annually, and that is about 5,000, 6,000 masajid are occupied and used during these 3 days, whether it's in the month of Ramadan or in the month of Rajab. The age group of people that generally participate is between 15 to 30 years old, and the ratio, so women are also participating. So it's about, there's obviously, they would say about 70% men, 30% women participate in the i'tikaf. Now, in Iran, there are some recent works that have been written analyzing the i'tikaf from a sociological perspective. Because as I said, it's a very new phenomenon, because i'tikaf has always been a personal act of worship. It's never been some institutionalized thing. But after the revolution, it became, not even immediately after the revolution, at least a decade or so after the revolution, it became a institutionalized thing where a lot of organizations and schools and institutes, government organizations, they all are part of this entire movement of getting people occupied with the i'tikaf, getting them to come out in the month of Rajab, in the month of Ramadan. And these two works were published recently, not too long ago, about I think 2 years ago, and there was a whole conference about it as well in Iran. The first book is by Rayhaneh Saremi. And she, her book is called A Rebirth, A Sociological Reflection on I'tikaf. It's in Farsi, obviously. If you can understand Farsi, you can Google these people up, and they even have articles published and so on. And in her book, her book is very interesting because she is looking at the i'tikaf from the perspective of the individual, and her research was done mostly on the woman participants, and she's arguing that, look, i'tikaf is for many women participants, it's a opportunity for rebirth, for being born again. That's the kind of approach that she's taking. She says, look, that many participants feel a sense of guilt during the i'tikaf. They say, look, people have this understanding that they have sinned in their day-to-day lives. They are guilty for making blunders and mistakes, and they also all realize that they are struggling in their lives. And due to the economic situation of the country, the general problems, and all of these issues that exist in society, they feel these issues and they want to seek an outlet. They want to run away from these issues. So they come to this i'tikaf, and in the i'tikaf they notice it's a gathering of many other hundreds of people who are going through the same experience. And when they come together, they see it as an opportunity to channel those those accusations and those blaming, the blame game that people play. These issues that I have are because of this reason and because of this reason, because of economic reasons, because of whatever reasons. It's an opportunity for them to go into this self-reflection mode and channel all of those attacks to themselves, and basically begin to realize that perhaps it is me. I need to confront these challenges in a much more courageous way. I need to be stronger in how I deal with these challenges. So essentially what i'tikaf becomes for many of these women, it's an opportunity to seek refuge. And in that refuge, it's a new birth for them. When they come out, they feel as if they are purified from their sins and blunders. It's as if before the i'tikaf, they were missing things in their lives. They were weak in their spiritual strength. And when they go to this i'tikaf, these 3 days that they are participating in it, they are coming back rejuvenated. They are coming back, and it's as if they have found things that they had initially lost. Because they recall their blunders. People have an opportunity to think about their mistakes and how they can fix themselves up. One other thing she says, that the i'tikaf, in the way that it is commemorated in Iran and organized in Iran, it becomes a means for people to develop their religious identity. And you're meeting people, and it's like this collective identity that is being formed. And it is also an opportunity for people to announce and declare their religiosity, which is very, very interesting. Because look, in a person's day-to-day life, even when you look at your own life, in your day-to-day life, many people feel, and in my opinion, this is due to the way we have been brought up, but regardless, many people feel that their day-to-day activities have nothing to do with religion. The majority of the activities have nothing to do with Islam or religion. For example, if you are going 9-to-5 job, you're working, you're talking to your colleagues, you're going out to a office party, for example, or you're driving to work. All of these things, you're cooking, you're cleaning. People don't see these as religious activities. The religious activities are when you're going to go pray or when you go fast. So people begin to think that majority of their life is as if it is disconnected from religion. It's got nothing to do with religion. A sports activity, nothing to do with religion. Working, it's an irreligious activity. So we're not saying it's irreligious, but it's irreligious, nothing to do with the religion. That's how people observe their life, and that's how people see their lives. And in order to sort of address that issue, they feel that they need to participate in certain activities that are purely religious from every dimension. And the i'tikaf becomes an opportunity for some of these people to go and throw themselves in that atmosphere. Everything now is purely religious. And that sort of gives them a sense of contentment with themselves. It's an opportunity for people to engage in activities that are purely religious, even if it's for a couple of days. And that's how people look at it. Of course, there are some issues with this, in my opinion, because it is possible to look at everything from a religious perspective. But our problem sometimes is the way what we consider a religion, generally speaking, is just a bunch of laws and regulations. And when we don't see that manifested in our day-to-day activities, we think we are not engaging in religious activities. That's something that we're going to talk about later on. Comprehensiveness of the Sharia. What is this? Is the religion, what are we even supposed to understand religion to be? Inshallah, that's for another dictation. But that's what she's talking about in her book. But then you have a second book. The second book here is by Mohammad-Reza Puyafar. And this is a slightly more critical take on the i'tikaf in the way that it is being done right now. This book is called Safar be Tanhahi. Basically a journey towards basically loneliness, if you want to call it, where an opportunity to take a journey towards a place where you can be all alone with yourself. Riwayati Mardam Nigarane as Tajrbe Dini i'tikaf, an ethnographic narrative of the religious experience of the i'tikaf. This is the book that he writes, and he says that look, the issue so he goes and he participates in the i'tikaf. So he says, I tried to go to Masjid Jamkaran first and it was packed. Like I could not, I missed the opportunity to sign up. I couldn't do it. He says the thing that has happened, people have three relationships that they want to maintain in their lives. One is a relationship with yourself. Second, it's a relationship with other people. And third, it is a relationship with God. And in the modern society, technically all three relationships have been messed up a little bit, to put it in nice words. But more specifically, he says the third relationship with God has seen a lot of chaos. People don't have a relationship with God anymore, and hence you see people always trying to go for ziyarah, for certain spiritual retreats, i'tikaf being one of them, because many people are suffering with loneliness, they're suffering with absurdity, lack of meaning in life. And this is just the reality of the modern world. And the modern world, and particularly in a place like Iran, where there's a conflict between tradition and modernity, they're still struggling with it. Creates a huge challenge for the Iranian society. I'tikaf in that is apparently meant to be an answer for this, right? Where you can go and fix your relationship with God by taking some time off from the dunya and just spending 3 days. But the issue that Mohammad-Reza Puyafar brings up in his book is that he says, look, the problem is that i'tikaf in the Islamic tradition has always just been a personal act of worship. Just like you do a mustahab salat When you do a mustahab salat, the purpose of the mustahab salat is for between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody even needs to know you're doing certain mustahab acts and mustahab prayers and so on. Nobody needs to know that. But he says the i'tikaf, because it has become institutionalized and it is so closely tied with all these different organizations and schools and institutions and so on, what that creates two issues. One is that simple acts that are meant to be very simple in religion, like a mustahab prayer. What do? You go pray 2 rakat and that's it. You move on with your life. Or i'tikaf, you go in a spiritual retreat, you go spend 3 days in a masjid, there are some laws you have to follow, and then you come back. He says when these things become institutionalized, it creates two issues. And that is, simple matters become very, very complicated. It become very complicated because now you're gonna need laws and regulations, and then you have these sign up procedures, and you had to meet a quota, because there's a quota for every mosque, you cannot have more than that many people. That's what happens. And he says, look, the second thing that happens is there is direct interference of these institutions in people's very personal religious affairs. A mustahab prayer, for example, is a very personal act of yours. If nobody has the right to interfere in that affair of yours, it's literally between you and God. I'tikaf is also one of those things. But once you institutionalize it, well, now not only are there all these complicated rules and policies and laws and all these rules you have to follow, but there are organizations and institutions that are getting themselves involved in your personal relationship with God. Because what's going to end up happening is now you have organized programs for the i'tikaf. From at 7 a.m. we're going to have this program. At 9 p.m. we're going to get this speaker to come in. At 10 a.m. we're going to have, this speaker is going to come. At 2 o'clock we have a workshop that's going to happen. And the entire 3 days is very, very clearly planned out. So that the form of it has changed, is what he's arguing. He's saying in the modern era, the i'tikaf, the form of the i'tikaf has changed from a personal act of worship to a congregational act of worship. And he says this kind of defeats the purpose, because the purpose of the i'tikaf was a personal spiritual retreat. It is a detachment from people. It's a detachment from congregation. So it's a journey which is towards yourself. And so you can build your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when you institutionalize it, well, now it's kind of like it's not even the real thing. Because now you're constantly, because one of the things he mentions that one of the benefits if i'tikaf is sukut, silence. You can just be in silence and build this connection. But in the way that it is done now, there's no silence. Everyone has a microphone. There's people, organizations, people are coming. I remember one time they even set up a workshop for Islamic medicine for like 1-2 nights, and that's kind of what's happening. And it becomes a sort of a congregational activity. There are cameras, recordings that are happening, people are taking pictures. And that, his book is a bit more critical. He's saying, look, you have changed the form of the i'tikaf from what it was meant to be. And that he's saying, look, this is very common. It's very similar to any other thing in religion when it becomes institutionalized. So example he gives is the religious customs. So he says, for example, you had Ashura and you had Arba'een, or you had Eid Ghadir, you had these 4 or 5 events in the calendar. But now if you look at the calendar, there's 50 more events. And there are events celebrating or commemorating people who are not even infallibles, like 2nd, 3rd level people. He says this is what happens. You keep creating more and more and more, because once you institutionalize it, you need to keep people busy with these things and sort of get, basically keep them busy with these things, because it's somehow it's reinforcing our vision and our mission and our goals and so on. So he says, look, although as I said, in his book, he argues that this actually results in more people becoming secular. That's a debate on its own. Does it or does it not? But anyway, that's what he's arguing in his book. So he's saying, the i'tikaf is a very interesting phenomenon in Iran. In the last couple of decades, we've seen this change. The format of it has changed. And he is saying that the i'tikaf, one of the points of it was being distant from people, being alone, being in silence, and all 3 of these things are gone. Another thing was that the i'tikaf had a element of freedom in it, but that's also gone, because The i'tikaf is now organized by these groups and organizations, so you don't have the freedom either, because they're gonna organize the program for you, they're gonna have a speech for you, they're gonna have a workshop for you. So he says, this is, these are my observations essentially. So these are just a couple of works that I wanted to expose the readers that, look, this type of work is being done in the academic institutes of Iran. A lot of this is very contemporary research. This is not anything old school, because this phenomenon itself is a very new phenomenon. But I'm just trying to show that as soon as these things occur within the Iranian academic scene, or even in the seminaries, there are researchers writing and publishing and researching these things, but they don't come to us in the English world. Or by the time they come to us, it's already been 30-40 years late. So in the dictations, part of what my intention was to show you guys the type of literature that is being produced within Iran, and how they're looking at these phenomena, how they are addressing and analyzing these things. So maybe when this phenomenon comes to the West, in our communities, we're already prepared for it, and we have a better grasp of how we should be implementing these things in our communities. If we should even implement them or not, that's a discussion. All of these are points of discussion. Things shouldn't happen so hasty. So anyways, I hope this was a new insight into the i'tikaf. It is an act of worship. For any specific rules and laws and ahkam of it, definitely just refer to your marja, because this show is not about teaching ahkam or anything like that. It's more about looking at the intellectual history of these things. And that's what I tried to show over here in today's talk, that look, the i'tikaf before the Safavids doesn't seem like it was a common practice in the Shia communities, but Shaykh Bahai and Shaykh Lutfullah, they started this practice in Safavid Iran. Shaykh Lutfullah, someone tried to critique him. He wrote a treatise responding to him, and it became a sort of practice in Persia and Iran, in the Shia community for the first time. And then after the revolution, particularly after the 8-year war, it once again was, it became institutionalized, and organizations and schools and even universities, they took the i'tikaf as an opportunity to get people to come to the masajid, get them to participate in the i'tikaf. Men, women, children, everyone comes, and they use it as an opportunity to, so the first book, as I said, showed that many women use that as a opportunity to really understand their religious identity, whereas the second work is a bit more critical, saying, look, it seems that sometimes it will result in people becoming more secular, because there's so much interference in one's personal journey to God and so on. So this is the kind of analysis that I wanted to present on this show, to sort of show you the journey of the phenomenon of i'tikaf in the Shi'i tradition. Inshallah, I hope this was unique. There's some unique perspectives in this. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments, drop them down in the comment section, inshallah. And I will see you all in a future video for sure, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.